All right, now let me create a React app while I'm doing this. So I'm gonna say create React app. Let's just say map project. All right, now another thing I want to touch on real quickly is I see a lot of students are having issues with Google Maps API and their key, and why it's giving errors just after a few page loads. I never had that problem, and even now I don't have that problem. So I'm gonna look into that, and I think I found out why. I guess people are using it the wrong way or trying to set up a new key the wrong way. So hopefully I can show the right way to do it. So I'm gonna start off by getting a key and then showing how to like do that sidebar responsive design. Lisa,
Thank you.
console.cloud.google. Actually, no, this isn't. Okay, so to create a new key, you would go to console.cloud.google.com, and it will take you to your backend in your Google account. And this is where you have many Google projects. Now, once you create a project, for example, I have a project called Grand, just an arbitrary name. Once you create a project, you can add API services to that project. So one of them would be Google Maps. And you can see that you have all the keys to the services here. So let's say we create credentials, we create an API key, we create a new one, use this key in your application, pass it with key equals API key. So once you select your project and then you come to credentials and you create a key, it's going to create a key for you, right? And then you'll want to restrict it so anyone can't just take it and start using it. So you'll go to restrict key, and you'll want to choose HTTP refers. And then here is where you list all of the URLs that are allowed to use your API key. So for now, I'm going to save that. And then you can just copy it. So once you have your key, then you just load Google Maps API script. So I'm gonna copy this right here. I add it to this basic page here that I made. I'm gonna copy that key and then just paste it here. Now, if I open this page and come to the console, I shouldn't get any errors. Press F12 and uncaught. Init maps. Okay, so let me go ahead and create that callback function. Source will be my script.js, save that. And then here, if I can find this simple thing right here. If I refresh it, okay, can I properly refresh child? No. Okay, so it's looking for map div. Let me go ahead and do that. Div ID equals map. Now if I refresh it, now we don't have any errors. So just to quickly recap, to get an API key, the way I do it is I'll come to console.cloud.google.com, or actually it was right there. So let me come back. You come to your Google account backend, you select one of your projects, you can create a new one. Once you select your project, you would come to the credentials section, you would create a new one, and then it's going to give you a key. You can just simply add it to the script. And I never got that for development purposes error ever. So I'm not sure what kind of key everyone was using, but I've never had that error. So hopefully doing it that way helps. Now, once you have a div with the ID map, you won't really see anything, although there's no errors, because there's no dimensions to it. So you just go ahead and do a simple style sheet. .css. Now here I'm just gonna do hashtag map, and let's say width is 100%, and height is 100 view height. So whatever the height of the screen is, that's what the map will be. So if I save that and refresh it, well, actually I have to link it. So style sheet, let's just say styles.css, refresh it, and we can see it takes up everything. Now let me get rid of this white spots. And while I'm going through this, feel free to just interject or ask questions. You know, you can make this interactive, not so much just demonstrating. Let's say body margin 0. And now, although I reloaded it, you can see that development purposes overlay isn't coming up. So you can reload as much times. I didn't put in any credit card information. It's working fine. So that's good. Now, as far as responsive design, the way I did my project was a sidebar. Is Lisa still here? She is. So let's say I have.
I'm still here. Sorry.
Hi, no problem. So how did you do your, I guess, sidebar where your list view is it on the bottom or the side?
On the side, I had 25% with the filter at the top. A filter as input search or filter, so I could filter the venues. And then the map was 75.
All right. Now, could you do a quick recap, please, from admin privately? I just joined. So, Amen, forgive me if I pronounced it improperly. You actually haven't missed too much. I just showed how I got my Google API key and basically just added to the screen. So you didn't miss much, and I can help with that in your Slack personal message, direct message. Right now, I'm just going over responsive design. So as far as getting things to look right, um, using percentages, Lisa, is good, but also using widths. So you can pretty much set specific widths at certain viewports where it's not too big and not too small. So to give an example of that, I'm going to create a div and give it the ID sidebar, right? Now, in this sidebar, what I'm going to do is say position will be fixed. And I'm going to say top is 0, left is 0. So it's going to be on the left side of the page. And I'm going to say width is 325 pixels. And I'm going to say max width is 100%. Now, the height will be, you can set this to, I like using view height, or you can set a fixed pixel amount. So let's say I have, let's just say, 500 pixels, and we have max height 100 view height. Now the reason why I'm using width and max width is because max width will kick in at some point. And just to give a visual of what that looks like, ID sidebar. I think I need to use Z index is 100. ID sidebar map. So right here, section fix, it says Z index is weird. It should be on top. Let me see. Bear with me while I troubleshoot this. Position fix, top, left. Width, sidebar. Display block. Wow, I'm having issues. It's not very professional. So that's there. The Z index isn't working. Width, type, overflow, position index. File, 0. Okay. Okay, let me hide the map for a moment so I can actually get to the important part. Let's say display none for now. And let's say the sidebar is, background is red. All right, so if we inspect this div right here, the sidebar, we can see that the width is 325 pixels, right? Now, no matter how much I resize it, as long as there's 325 pixels, it's only going to be that width. And that way it won't get too, I guess, too large. It won't stay completely proportional. It can stay like a nice consistent size.
Can
Now,
you test it over there where up above or next to elements where the responsive with the mobile is? Can I see, does it work there?
yeah, so if I resize it down, you can see it's only as wide as the screen is. So if I were to toggle the mobile device,
Mm-hmm.
you can see that
Okay.
on, well, actually, I need to add the viewport meta tag. So uh, viewport will be width is equal to device width and the initial scale equal to 1.0. Now if we refresh it, all right, now you can see that, let's say the height is 200 viewport. Now I can scroll up and down, but I can't really scroll left and right, you know? So that's pretty much the responsive design. At some point, this div will only be as wide as the screen. And that's pretty much what the max width property is doing. It's going to kick in and make sure that nothing is going to go off the screen.
Okay.
That's the way I did it. You know, there are different ways. Normally, if an element is taking up the entire width of a portion of the screen, then it's not too hard to resize it because nothing will have to float to the next line. So I guess it depends on how you have your page set up. Does that kind of help, Lisa? Or
It does. It helps a lot. Thank you. I may DM you later with my link so you can see my stuff.
okay, that works too. Is anyone else here with a question how to do a particular portion of the project? I'm working on.
Filtering. Yes.
I am here. I'm working on filtering. All right, I can do that. So I had this new React project installing in the background. It looks about done. So I'm going to cd and what did I call it? Map.project. And I'm going to do yarn start. Now, bear with me while I get things set up to answer that. Can you go over form handler, the search filtering? Yes, I can do that. So I have this brand new React app loading up. Let me show the way I did it. And I'm going to be using Google Maps directly. I won't be using another React library to load Google Maps because it's not flexible in my opinion. I haven't found any out there that really gives you everything you need that you could do directly. So I personally recommend using Google Maps directly for this particular project. Now in this folder, it's loading up. Huh, React must have changed their scaffolding. All right. Now, earlier today, I actually wrote this function that kind of makes it simple. I'm going to go to that file really quickly and just pull that. So here's the link. I should add it in the Slack. Basically, it's a function that makes it easy to load Google Maps directly. All you have to do is just put your key in this string and then call this function all you have to do is call this function to resolve Google Maps. So I'm gonna copy this. I recommend everyone use this since it's here and it's easy to use. I'm gonna create a new file in the source directory and just call it utils. Now I recommend having some like utility file to have functions here to make it easier to use in your component. You don't wanna have too much code in here that has really nothing to do with the actual component, because you may need to use that same function in different components. So that's just my advice. You know, it's not like the right or wrong way to do things, but just what makes life easy. So here I have this function, and basically what it does is it returns a promise, and in this promise is going to asynchronously and dynamically load Google Maps script. And when it loads, it's going to resolve that Google object. And with that Google object, you can create a new map instance, new markers, new info window, pretty much every service that comes with Google. And once it resolves it, it's going to delete it from the global object. So, you know, it can't be called in the console and it can't really cause any like bad side effects. So it's going to basically create a callback function for the script. And when that callback function runs, it's going to resolve it and then delete it. So that way you can get Google into your components. So I'm going to save that. I'm going to come to my backend, use this key, I'm going to place it right here in the string. I'm actually going to put a link to this in the chat so anyone can just to admin privately to everyone. Hopefully everyone can see it. So I didn't link to this in the chat. Now that I have this util function, I'm going to come to app.js. I'm going to import it. Utils, I'm going to say imports load Google Maps from utils. Now I'm going to go ahead and delete all of this stuff that it comes with. Give this an ID map. So right now we have nothing. We keep the DevTools open. Now let me, bear with me while I let this not perform. Sorry, I'm just grabbing a few things before I get started, just to get things ready. This was from my project that I submitted. This is app CSS. And ID map. All right, so the way I did my project was I have all of the data as far as like API. I use Foursquare and I use IDB, so I can have the data I use inside of the browser's database, so I won't have to make an API call, which will work with your service worker. And basically, I wrote the app to where it won't do anything until I have all of the information. So to give an idea of what that looks like, inside this main app component, I have a component did mount method. Now in this method, this is where I will start off by getting all of the things that I need, one of which is Google Maps. So since I know a lot of the things that I need will be promises, which I recommend using, I'm going to store them in variables first. So let's say let uh, Google Maps promise, which is short. Maybe I should just spell it out. And basically call that function from the utils. Now I'm going to use promise.all. This takes an array of promises. So let's say this one for now. Then I will get an array of values. Let's go ahead and log it and see what we get. And if we look at it, it's an array, and the first object is Google Maps. We can see maps, animation, data, circle, everything from that Google Maps object, right? Now, that's one. Let me go ahead and get the API for the Foursquare data really quickly. I have that source. Tills. Say that city. All right, so in my utils, I'm just going to write a quick function to get all of the places. So export function load places. So basically, I just have two strings. I'm using Foursquare API, and I'm just appending these strings to this API URL at the very last. Do I have the limit? Limit is 50. So city query API URL. And then this fetch function returns a promise. And then I'm going to resolve it as JSON. So I can just go ahead and return that. Right? Now that I have this function here, I can go ahead, come back to the app.js, and make it one of the things that I will require before I even load the page. So let's say places promise equals that function. Let me go ahead and import that. And then add it to the list of promises that I will want to resolve before I even start the page. If I come back, you can see that values has 2 items in it now. So not only do I have Google Maps ready, but now I also have my information ready, the venues, each of them having ID, name, and categories and so forth. So at this point here, this console log, I have everything I need ready. So when using Google Maps, normally in React, you would put your information and data in this state. So you probably run this set state, and then you'll probably save the venues in the state. this particular situation, my intuition is saying I would rather use the component's properties rather than storing it in the state because it's easier to manage. And I know that I'm going to interact with the map later at some point. So I recommend doing this dot Google is equal to, well, let me just say, let's Google equals values, which is the array. And since the Google Maps promise was the first in the array, it's going to be the first of the values. So the first index is 0. So let Google equals values and the 0 index. Now for venues, I know that's the second promise, which will be the second item in the array. So I index 1. Now that's an object. We can see meta and response. And inside response, we have venues. So I'm going to do dot response dot venues. So I recommend storing everything inside the component state, not the state, I'm sorry, the component properties, not the state. So it would be easier to access and deal with. Just for Google, the data venues you can store in the state, but as far as Google Maps, anything dealing with that, I recommend having as a component property and not keeping it in the state. So I have a copy of Google in the component state. I'm also going to create a component property called markers, and I'm going to store all map markers in this list. Again, not putting the markers in the state because it's Google Maps. It's a different kind of object. I know I'm going to interact with it a certain way. It's going to be easier to deal with rather than dealing with it in the state, because every time I change a marker, I'm going to have to use set state. It's going to cause a re-render, and it's going to be a performance bottleneck. So that's just my personal advice. Everything dealing with Google, you want to have it in your components property, not in the state. So just use this dot whatever. So this is where I'm going to keep markers, right? Now, once I have my venues, I'm going to say venues, which is an array. And arrays have a for each method. So for each venue, I'm going to run a callback. Now for each venue, I want to create a marker. So rather than doing it from scratch, I'm just going to use what I already made. All right, now to create a marker, we say new google.maps.marker, and then you pass in an object. Now in this object that you pass to a new Google Map marker, the position and the map properties are required. And that is what will create the marker. You can also add your own properties to that object, and you can still read them later. So in addition to these two required props, you can add other props. And the reason why I'm adding an ID prop is so I can pinpoint this exact marker later. And I'm adding the name prop so I can filter the markers later. So actually, I didn't create the map instance. Let me go ahead and do that now. And again, I recommend storing the map instance in the components property, since it'll be easier to access and manage. I don't recommend keeping the map instance in this state. So I'm going to create a new Google Maps map, get the div with the ID map, which is down here. Scroll, zoom, venues. All right, now since venues is a list of venues, I'm just gonna get the very first one and get its location, latitude and longitude. So that's basically what's going on here. Now if I save that, I can come back to the page. Yes.
Sorry, but I figured out how to zoom in on your screen from the view options. So if you can reduce the size of your editor there, then we probably can see more of the screen.
I'm sorry, come again?
I'm only seeing like a few lines of the editor because it's so big.
Oh, okay. So zoom out.
Right.
Is this good?
You can go smaller because on the view options, it gives us an option to zoom.
Oh, you guys have the option to zoom. Oh,
Right. Yeah.
okay. So how's this?
How's that for everyone? It's still kind of big.
I don't think we're going to be able to see all of the code in one screen because he's already on line 43. So by the time we come to see it again in YouTube, I mean, we'll be a little more organized and know it. But for now, he's just working his way down. There's nothing really he can do.
Okay, on my screen, I can see lines 19 to 44. Is that the same for everyone?
No, I can see 19 through 31.
Oh, you see 19 through 31.
I see 19 through 44.
Yeah, this depends on your zoom options here, but that's fine. You can go ahead and see it.
Oh, so it's different for everyone?
Yeah, because like right now I'm zoomed at 100%, which is original size. So you can change the zoom ratio in Zoom.
Okay, hopefully everyone can see it. If anyone just wants me to scroll up or down, just you can say something in the chat or just feel free. Yeah, back to what I was saying. I recommend keeping the map instance in the component property, not the state, because this particular situation, Google Maps is a lot different. So once I have that saved and come back, you can see we have all these map markers. It works the same, right? We're not using any React library. We're using Google Maps directly, and we're still inside, React territory. So I think it's much more flexible and easier to use that way. Now, I'm also going to create a new info window. Again, keeping a reference to it in the components property using the this keyword. Now, back inside the loop, once I create a marker, I save that. And also pay attention to the animation because I know that's one of the requirements that the reviewers are going to ask for when they grade it. So you can see that the markers drop when the page loads. So that's one thing you can do. Now, once we have a marker, let's go ahead and push it to that list that we have. So this dot markers that push, we're going to push this marker right here, right? So right now we have Google Maps and then we have this list of markers right here. So this is head, body. So What did I do? I have nav bar side position absolutes, index, max width, max height. So let me go ahead and add this really quickly. So I have this map. Let me go ahead and make this sidebar really quickly. I know it's taking a while to get to that original question how to filter, but I just had to build my way up to that point. Oh yeah, gotta have an apparate. Is there a reason why it's all the way down there? That is crazy. So the map is overflow hidden, width is 100%. Height is 100% minus. The sidebar is position absolute. Z index. The sidebar should be at the top. Height is 100%. Max width, absolute. Let me try adding top. Oh, that works. Well, let me just add that for now. Styling is not the key here. All right, so let me go ahead and add an input really quickly. Inputs, and let's say value equals this dot, let's say state dot query. And now input in React will need an onChange event handler. So let's say onChange, let's say this dot filter venues, right? Now, well, actually this is brackets, I need curly braces. So this dot filter venues. So this is the method that I'm gonna write right now, and I'm gonna show you how I filter the venues, or I filter the markers. So let me go ahead and write that now. All right, now in this method, all I'm gonna do is just loop through each of the markers and then just check if the query matches the input from this input element right here. So actually bear with me one moment. Okay, sorry, my apologies. So on the on-change method, you can accept the event handler, right? Hi, can everyone hear me? Okay, good. So with this on change, I'm basically accepting that event, right? Which will have the value in it. So I'm gonna call this dot filter venues, and I'm going to pass in that value. So e dot target dot value. Now, if I were to log it, let's see what we get so far. An error can be part of query of null. Okay, so I actually have to set up the state. So let me add a constructor. Super props, and I'm gonna say this dot state is equal to object. Query will start off empty string by default. So then this won't error out. All right. Now, if I were to type in this input, let's say G, you can see right there. Now it's not working because every re-render is going to just say this dot state dot query. I'm not really updating the state. So we'll get to that. Let's say this dot set state query will be, well, basically query. So we're gonna type into it. All right, so that's working right now. Now, how to filter markers. Now, Google Map markers have, each marker has a specific method that allow you to hide and show it from the map, right? Now, strings have a method called includes. So just to show you quickly, JS string includes. I recommend coming to this website whenever you want to learn about a new method, see how it works. They will give an explanation as to what it is and how you use it. So basically, strings have this includes method that determines if one string is found within another, basically checking a substring. So because I added the mean property to each marker, that's going to allow me to filter them in this method here. So I'm going to say this dot markers dot for each, right? I'm going to go through each of the markers. Now, what I'm going to do is make a ternary. Now, if I log marker, let's say I type inside the input, let's say H. You can see array. Oh, wow. For each venues, I should push the marker. If I did H. All right, now we can see each of the marker instances. Let's console logging each of them in the list. Now, if we open it, we can see that name property right there. You see ID, you see venues. So in addition to position and map, you can also set more properties to a Google Map marker object. Now, what I'm gonna do is write a condition, and if it's true, I'm going to toggle the map marker's visibility. So I have the query here in the input to this component method. Now let's say marker.name, right? And I want to say that to lowercase because I don't want the user's input to throw off the query. I want it to be case insensitive, so I want to make it lowercase. Now I'm going to say that includes query dot to lowercase, right? Now, if this is true, meaning whatever they typed in is inside the name, if this is true, I'm going to say marker set visible. I'm going to say true, right? Now, if this query is not found inside the marker's name, I'm going to do the opposite and set it to false. Now, that should work. Now, if we're to type in H, we can see one of them moved, right? Now, if I were to delete H, it comes back. And the reason why it comes back is because inside the console, let me demonstrate. If I just type in any random characters in a string, and then I say that includes, right? Now, if I pass in an empty string, it's true. So as far as JavaScript, an empty string is included in a regular string, right? Now, since the input is blank, it will default to an empty string. And since empty strings are technically considered inside of the regular string, it's going to return true. And since it returns true, it's going to set the marker visibility to true. So that's what this condition does right here, basically. So just to recap, once you have your input element, you would just create an onChange method. You will pass in that value to whatever method you define. And in that method, you essentially just loop through all of the markers and you would compare that name property to the query. Or at least that's how I did it, because that's kind of what makes sense. So if I were to, let's see, type in X, you can see only one place has that. You know, if I type in another X, we get nothing. Now, as far as the info window, how did I do it? Market that event. Consider. Let me just take this right here. Now, basically, I just took this from the project I did. So let me explain what's going on here. So we're still inside the loop. For each marker, I add an event listener click, and if marker.getAnimation is not null, then we'll set it to null. Else, I'm going to set the animation to bounce, and then I'm going to time it out and set it back to null in 1.5 seconds. So basically, it looks a little info box not defined. Content. This the one that said content. Let's just say marker.name. All right, now if I click on it, you can see it bounces up and then it stops. All right, click on this one. Actually, I don't want matte set zoom. Let me get rid of that. So basically that's how the way I filtered it. So does that answer your question? Who was it? It was Kingo, LW, and Amber. Does that answer your question? Yes, yes. Good. All right, now does anyone have any other questions? Are we required to filter the list in the sidebar too? Yes, you are. And it's actually easier than you think. So in this loop, so basically your data is like the main source and everything else would be modeled after this data. So this marker is just, an extension of a piece of information. And so will items on the sidebar. So let me go ahead and we have venues here. Let me go ahead and set this. So let's say this dot set state. Let's say venues will be venues, right? Now, when this gets called set state, it's gonna cause a re-render. So at this point, we'll have data in our state. Now, I'm going to write a condition that will only run when there's venues in the state. So let's say this dot state dot venues, and so not only does this venues property exist on the state, but we're also going to check this dot state dot venues dot length is greater than 0. Now, if both these conditions are true, then that's when we decide to render our list of venues on the sidebar. So let's say this dot state dot venues dot map, right? Now let's say I'm gonna have venue and we have index. So let's go ahead and return, let's say a div. Now this is just for demonstration. You can style it as you please, but just to show how you can filter out the venues. Let's give it a class. Venue dash item. Let's just say venue dot name. Okay, let's see how this looks right now. Okay, you cannot use semicolons. All right, so we have all these venues right here. Let me just style it really quickly so it's easier to see and follow. We have venue item. And let's see where, well, let me just make a new class. So that venue item. Now let's say padding is what, 5 pixels. Let's say margin bottom. Let's say what, 10 pixels. Actually, no, let's do padding 5, margin bottom 5. Let's say border is 1 pixel, solid, let's say gray. All right, that's fine. And so we have that. Now, I have the venues. Actually, I should store venues in the state too. So let's say this dot venues equals the venues. Now, the reason why I'm doing this because I want to have a copy of the original data source, and I'm only going to show a filtered version of it. So whenever I need a copy, I can just refer to the components property. So instead of venues, I'm going to say filtered venues will be this dot venues. So by default, the filtered venues will just be all of them, right? So I'm going to change that here, change it here, change it here. Venues is not defined. 936, 36. Let's say this dot venues, this dot venues. All right, so each key, each child. So let's go ahead and give this a key index. All right, so essentially all we have now is just a visual of that original data source. We have it as a list item and we have it as a marker, right? Now, when we filter it, so far it's only filtering the markers, right? We want to filter these at the same time, which isn't really that much more work. Now, inside that same method, you don't really need separate methods. You can do both things in the same method. Basically, in this method, all I'm going to do now is create a variable that will have a filtered version and pretty much use the same logic here, where I'm just going to check if the query is inside the venue's name. So I'm going to say let f equal this dot venues, right? That's the reason why I save the venues to the component property so I can reference it later. Now, this dot venues, let's say dot filter, right? Now, inside this filter callback, let's say venue. Now, I want all the venues where the name includes the query. Basically, essentially the same as this, because both the markers and the list items are coming from this original data source, which is the venues callback from the API. So basically, this one line is saying, give me all of the venues where the name includes the query, right? And then I'm going to say that filtered venues be whatever is the result of that filter. So the next time it re-renders, since we're saying this set state, and set state calls a re-render, since we're re-rendering, the next time around, it's gonna have a different amount, right? So let's go ahead and see how that looks. I would type in, well, let's just give it a placeholder. Placeholder equals filter content. All right. Let's just not break. All right. Now, let's say I type in X. You can see I'm going to get one result and just one marker, because both the list item and the marker is just referencing one data source, which is why, in theory, both that same logic works for both of them, where name has that query inside of it. So once I delete it, oh wait, so my apologies. I forgot to update the query. So let's say X, delete that, C, F, G, S, R, T, 4. So basically, that's working. G, B, G, D. So you get the idea, right? Does that answer your question, Amber? Okay, LW, how does the list view return to the menu? I'm not sure if I understand what you're asking. How does the list view return to the menu? I was definitely making this part more complicated than it had to be. Hey, don't worry, this took me a long time. It's a lot of trial and error, so hopefully this way of doing it helps. I think it's much more simpler. You can see it's just less than 10 lines of code to knock 2 birds out in 1 stone. So. Is there any other questions that anyone have? Can you show how to animate the markers if you click on a list item? Yes, I can do that. So on each item you render in your list, one moment, please. Okay, sorry. So basically for each item inside that loop, when you're creating your list items, each of them you can call a on click callback. So let's say on click, you have um, you give a function. Now, instead of just passing the reference, the reason why I'm passing an anonymous arrow function is because I'm going to pass data to that method. So let's say this dot list item click, right? I'm going to pass in that venue, right? And that way I can take the ID and then pinpoint which marker to animate. So let's go ahead and create this method. I'll create it right here. So there are two ways of writing methods inside of React. A lot of people do it as this. Right? So basically you assign an anonymous function, anonymous arrow function to that property, or you can just simply do it this way. Now for those who do it this way, where you don't have that arrow syntax, if you want to keep a reference to the context of this component, you would have to go into constructor and bind this method to itself, which will look something like this. And the reason why you have to do this is because when you pass these component methods down to children, you want to keep a reference to the context, right? And doing the bind method inside the re-render is bad performance because it's going to create a new function reference every time the render function gets called, and it's going to be a big performance bottleneck. So for those who create component methods this way without the arrow syntax, be sure to bind it to itself inside the constructor. But for those who prefer to do it the other way, same thing, you know, let's say equals the arrow syntax, right? Now, when this function runs, we're going to accept that venue, right? Now, we want to pretty much animate the marker that correlates to whatever item we clicked on. So let's say we clicked on Colesville Shopping Center. We want to animate the marker with that location there. So first, we're going to need to get that marker. And we know that we can get it via the ID property we gave it when we created it, which came from that venue. So let's say let marker equals this dot markers. Let's filter it. Now give me the marker with the ID that's equal to the venue's ID. Right? Now the filter method returns an array, and there should only be one result because IDs are unique. So it should just be that first index. Now if I log marker, you see that marker venue IDs equals to. Now if I were to click on one of these, you can see we get that marker right there. I clicked on Eastover Shopping Center, and then we can see Eastover Shopping Center. So we have that marker. All we have to do is just animate it. And we can just copy the code that you wrote or that I wrote when we initialized it. So basically just everything inside of here. So I'm going to simply copy, paste it here. Let's say this.info window. I say content, market name, market position. So it should be seamless. It should just work straight out. Now let's say I click on Eastover and it works. Woodmore, Montrose, let's say Westwood, Greenway is working. So hopefully that helps. Again, this is just the way I did it. It seems simple. You know, if there's another way you find it and if it works, then that's good. But I think this way is simple. So hopefully that helps. And does that answer your question, Libby? And so Lisa, what are the other components for? Aren't we supposed to have components? For example, breaking down map, this view. Right, so they're gonna want you to pretty much abstract a lot of the contents in your render into separate components. So instead of me doing this directly here, you would pretty much write your own component and just pass those venues there to do that, you know. I didn't see animation either. Oh, let me copy that. Let's go ahead and copy this, put it here. Google is not defined. Google isn't, but this that Google is. Now let's say I click on Westwood and it bounces. There, we got it working. All right. Now, back to what Lisa was saying. So, right. So instead of just doing everything straight there, you know, you can have a component for a map. You can have all of this. You know, let's just say I had another component. Let's just create a folder. Let's say components. Inside of it, I have, let's say, sidebar.js. Now, this default sidebar, export default function sidebar. Now this will be a stateless component, but actually it won't be so stateless after all I want it. Since it has the side, wait, yeah, it has the input in it. Yeah, so let me go ahead and just default sidebar, import, you don't need any of this. Having state in the sidebar. Get rid of all of this. Let's not click to venues. Get rid of all of this. All right, now all I'm going to do is just keep the sidebar let's say I put that in here. Now, instead of state, it's going to come via props. So this dot props, this dot props, this dot props, this dot props, 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 this dot props, target, this dot props, query, no state. All right, so we have that. Let's just go ahead and import that. Import sidebar from all right, now that I have this sidebar, let's go ahead and render it. Now that I have this sidebar, I'm gonna have to pass some information to it. Basically that filtered menus and those callback methods. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that now. And as far as LW's question, which is better, the arrow function or write the function to bind, you can basically achieve the same thing either way. You know, I honestly don't know the difference. That's probably something I should research. I'm gonna read up on it, but to my knowledge right now, I don't see the difference between setting a component's property to an arrow function as opposed to just binding it inside the constructor. So they both pretty much do the same thing, and both have, I guess, similar performance. I guess performance, both of them. Okay, so I have the sidebar component. Let me go ahead and just pass. So let's say equals. I will say it's simpler to write. You know, I don't have to go inside a components constructor and just bind everything to itself. So I'll say it is quicker. So let's say item click equals this item click. So we need item click, we need filter menus, and we need the filtered. We got filtered menus. We got filtered menus. Okay. Filtered menus equal this dot state dot filtered menus. So we save this. So everything is basically the same. You know, works the same. You know, not much of a difference. The only thing is now that sidebar is in a component all in itself instead of directly inside the app state. So, you know, you can do the same thing for a map, you know, and technically that's what reviewers are looking for. It's just how you organize your code. So hopefully that helps, Lisa. Now, David Apex, the info window opened, but I didn't see the marker animate. Did I miss it? Yeah, so to animate the marker, each marker objects from Google Maps will have a set animation method, and you'll pass in google.maps.animation.bounce. And the way I use it is I will check if it's currently animated. If it's not, then I will animate it. And if it is, then I'll just set it to null, right? So that's the way I do it. So at least it does. Thank you so tremendously. Glad I could help. I'll take just a few more questions before I go. Does anyone else need help with anything in particular? Any questions? What is the pan by? That's a good question. I think, pan by is pretty much, change the focus of the screen to where that marker is, basically. Because without it, let's say if I click a marker, oh, still works. Where is this? Pan by. No, that set center does that. So what is pan by? So let's say I comment out pan by and do set center. I guess I really don't need it. I mean, is not too much of a difference with or without it. But hey, whatever floats your boat. Can you explain the constructor? Why does it still work why does it still work if you just use stage? So, again, it's just different ways of doing the same thing. I could technically just move the state outside the constructor and everything works completely fine. There's no difference. It's honestly just a different way of doing the same thing. So it's just, I guess, convention at this point. It's nothing too different programmatically. The constructor method gets called whenever a new instance of this class gets created. And inside this constructor, that's when you usually, as far as React context, this is where you would actually, I guess, set some props to the state or do other things. That's the reason why if I log props, and we get, you can see we get an empty object. But in the sidebar, let's say we did that same thing, we log props. We can see all the information that we passed to it, right? Now, let's say we have something inside the props. We can do this dot states equals, and we can use props to set up initial state. So that's one way you can use it. It just boils down to what you need to do and how you want to do things. If you have a component that receives props from a parent component, and you want to use that at the initial state, then you would use the syntax right here. But if it's like a stateless component, then you really wouldn't even need a constructor. So Babel is actually converting state to extract their background. Huh, you learn something every day. I honestly didn't know that. So yeah, that's JavaScript for you. It does a lot of things for you in the background. It's a lot of abstraction. So there you go. Any last questions? If not, I'm gonna wrap up with a few closing tips. So stateless component has no state. Basically, yes. Actually, essentially, yes. That's what it is. So it's just, JSX or content that just renders things based on information it's given. It doesn't really manage its own information. Since you said that the React Google Map libraries weren't that great for this project, would you recommend using your method if we use Google Maps in another React project? I personally would recommend using this function block because it's simple and it allows you to use Google Maps directly, and there's no limitations when using Google Maps directly. So, it's just my recommendation. I would say it's easier to use. If you somehow come across something even better, I've seen some students use Leaflet and some other type of project or other type of library out there. So whatever you're comfortable using, I'd say go for it. But if you want to use Google Maps directly, then I do recommend using this way. Does stateless component need constructor? Actually, no, it doesn't. So basically, there are two ways of writing stateless components. You can create the class itself, and inside of the render method, you won't really reference state, you just reference props. Or you can just literally write a function that returns some JSX syntax expressions. So for example, let's say I have a function here function text G, right? So let's say I have a function called text G or text component. It takes in a string, right? Now all it's gonna do is return let's say it's gonna return a paragraph and just gonna return whatever that string is inside a paragraph, right? So this is a stateless component because it doesn't have state. All it's doing is returning JSX with whatever information it's given. So I have that. Now, if I wanted to use that, let's say inside the render method, I can do, let's go under the sidebar. I can do text component. Now I should be able to render it like this. Text component string equals, let's say, string equals some text. So actually, this would be props, and then props.string. So I think that's how you use it. Text component is not defined. maybe I'm not using it the right way. So I, as you can tell, I don't use stateless components that much this way. So yes. One moment, please. Sorry about that. So as far as it being a function, let's say I use a JavaScript expression and then I just call that function name, and then I'll just pass in a string of some text. Let's go ahead, string text component not defined. Oh, that's probably why. And we see some text right there, you know? So that's one way. Let me see if the other way works, because it was a misspelling. So let's say text component, let's say string is some text, come back, let me say props dot some text, no errors, same thing. Okay, so even though it's in, you know, function syntax, we can still render it with the component syntax inside of JSX. So both ways works. If you use it this way, the component syntax, then you're gonna have to reference each props, because props will come as an object. You know, I log props, you can see some string or some text, right? The reason why you're seeing it twice is because there's two re-renders. The first time the page loads, and then, you know, when set state gets called right here. So you're seeing it twice, but basically you can use either or. So hopefully that helps. Thank you so much, Ryan. Really, really helpful. Great session. No problem. Maybe use a great article on that, right about that. All right, so I'm gonna end this session. Thanks for watching. I just want to end with a few tips. In this particular project, I recommend using Google Maps directly because you get full flexibility. Other libraries I've seen out there doesn't allow you to do things like animations, and it's hard to pinpoint those particular markers because you're rendering them in the render method. They're not really an object that you're storing in the state, and it makes it hard to pinpoint which marker you want to interact with at some later point. So I recommend using Google Maps directly. I recommend using both widths and max width in your styling for responsive designs. That way, the width will only be as wide as the screen once it scales down, like as you can see right here. So nothing is going off horizontally. Everything's just vertical. You can choose whatever width you want. At some point, it'll only be that wide. So just make sure you're using your media queries. You're using the max widths. And as far as the service worker, you can use the same service worker file from your project 5 that you use for your restaurants app. It's perfectly fine. You know, it still works the same. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can go ahead and just take that. That's exactly what I did. So here in my project, I have start service worker. The register service worker comes with the React whenever you scaffold in the project, but this is just one I created. And in it, I just created the service worker instance. I registered it. Everything in the project folder in React will be in the root directory. So that's why I have my service worker file here. And then, you know, same thing from project 5. You can just copy that file and use it here. That's perfectly fine. So there's that. And IDB, you know, that helps too. So back in my code, I have methods where is it, utils? So basically I have functions that will check each items in the database, in the browser database, and function that will store items in there. And that way you can use information there without having to make an AJAX call. So what I demonstrated here in this session is just like a light version, but when you build yours, basically you want to have these helper functions that you will call to check for certain things. So for example, the full version of my function where I load places, the first thing I do is call this function called get venues, which is up here. And basically is just going to get all the venues out of the database, the object store, right? Now, if the length is 0, meaning there's nothing in IDB, then I'm going to do everything here. But if there is results, if it's greater than 1, then I'm just going to resolve that. I won't even need to make that AJAX call. So if there's nothing there, then that's when it comes down here. So I will make that call. Once I get the response, then I'll store the response inside IDB with this function here, store venues, and just a little bit of what that looks like. Store venues takes in that list. This is doing checking if it exists, if the length is greater than 0, making sure each venue is an object and has the ID property, because ID would be the key path that will distinguish each objects. And once it passed all of this validation, that's when I will start a new transaction, loop through each of the menus, and for each of them, just put it in the store. Once that's done, just resolve that promise. So once I store all the venues, that's when I will resolve it. So basically, this one function handles all of this logic. And all I have to do is just call load places wherever I need it. And that's partly why I put it inside this utils function, because you never know what component will need those places or that data set. So you can probably use it in your app component or some sidebar or main component or your navigation, wherever you need it, you can just call it since it's abstracted away inside this utils function. So that's just what I recommend. And I think that's the bulk of the project. Every student doesn't really have too much help with styling, not too much issues with other aspects, just mainly loading Google Maps, animating the markers, and filtering it. So hopefully this session helps. And I think that's about it. So thanks for watching. I have this recorded. I'm going to upload it. It's been about 2 hours now. It's pretty long. So once I save it, I'm going to upload it to YouTube, and I'm going to provide a link to it in Slack so you can replay it whenever you want to reference back to any particular points of the project. So thanks for watching, and I hope you all take care. See you guys later.